Hello, and welcome to our session on the impact of lived expertise in evidence-based practice work. In our session today, participants will explore the benefits of incorporating evidence-based practices and people with lived expertise into their child welfare agencies by hearing firsthand from successful programs and practitioners. Participants will also be able to identify strategies to recruit and integrate people with lived expertise in the workforce. We're going to kick off the session with a presentation from Tina Willauer, Director of the START program, and Kelly Kirk, a Certified Peer Support Specialist from Richmond County, North Carolina, Health and Human Services.
Hi everyone, I'm Tina, and I'm going to kick us off today with a high-level overview of the Sobriety Treatment and Recovery Teams model, also known as START. And I always like to begin with a little history about the model. START's been around a long time, since the 1990s, and it's taken this long to evolve into an evidence-based intervention. The model began in Toledo, Ohio, first as the Alcohol and Drug Addiction Protection Team in 1989, and later evolved into the START model in Cleveland, Ohio in the mid-90s during the crack cocaine epidemic, when high numbers of children were coming into relative and foster care due to parental substance use, especially infants with prenatal substance exposure. And outcomes were poor for families, particularly families of color. This was around the time of the enactment of the Adoption Safe Families Act that shortened the time period for parents to complete services and make a stable environment for their children. The model was developed with this in mind, since we know that recovery process for families can take longer than that small defined time frame. Fast forward to 2007, we were amidst the opioid epidemic in our country, and Kentucky was at the epicenter, facing some of the same issues that we faced in Ohio during the crack cocaine epidemic in the 90s. Rising numbers of children in foster care, now high overdose rates, and more trauma due to family separation. Kentucky implemented START in 3 unique jurisdictions in 2007, both urban and rural, and that's significant since this model began in an urban setting. And it was important to be sure this model also worked in a rural setting. Rigorous program evaluation and testing of the model occurred during this time with the help of 2 regional partnership grants through the Children's Bureau, and those grants were really instrumental in START's growth into an EBP. In 2008, we began replicating the model within our state and outside of the state, and several START pilots occurred in Indiana, Northwest Georgia, and the Bronx in New York City. And by 2016, the evidence base was large enough that START was added to the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse for Child Welfare. In 2017, we established the National START Training and Technical Assistance Program at Children and Family Futures to prepare for scale up and replication nationally. And then START was added to the Title IV Prevention Services Clearinghouse in December of 2020 as a promising practice, and we moved to a rating of supported in 2021. So what started as a response to the events that were happening to a lot of children and families in a variety of different communities, we ended up with an evidence-based program that's focused on child safety, recovery, family unification, and systems transformation. START's now in 9 states, and this is a map showing the current START affiliates. 2 of our START affiliates, Kentucky and Ohio, have already included START in their 5-year prevention plans and are drawing down funds to sustain the model, and several other of our affiliates are planning to do the same. So what is START? Well, it's a child welfare-based intervention, meaning it lives in child welfare offices. It serves families who come to the attention of the child welfare system due to substance use concerns and who at least have 1 child between the ages of 0 and 5. You really want to think about START as a specialized unit in your child welfare agency. It's not a treatment program or a curriculum-based EBP. START workers are actually the child welfare workers who provide ongoing services to families with open cases. START helps parents find recovery from substance use disorders to help keep their children safe and to avoid family separation when it's safe and possible to do so. And START does this by using a group of strategies and a rapid timeline of early identification, screening, assessment, and referral for quick access to treatment for families. Eligible families are engaged and offered treatment services far earlier than in traditional child welfare cases. And our research tells us that this early engagement of families results in more positive outcomes at the end of the case. And I'll tell you about that in just a minute. So all this requires close collaboration and partnership with our substance use and mental health treatment providers to be able to provide those intense and coordinated services for families. START is grounded in family-centered practice, meaning we work with the entire family to help strengthen the family unit and improve parental capacity. Services are provided to each individual and to the collective family unit and are focused on strengthening the bond and relationship between the children and parents. The model's approach is strength-based, and families are seen as partners in change instead of recipients of services, a paradigm shift that involves power sharing with families. And finally, the model is used to transform how the system interacts with and on behalf of families, like a catalyst for systems change within and between child welfare, substance use treatment providers, the courts, and other family serving systems. Staffing for START includes the pairing of a child welfare worker and a family mentor called a dyad, who are located in the child welfare office and share a capped caseload of no more than 12 to 15 families. Family mentors are individuals in long-term recovery who also have their own lived child welfare experience as parents, and they're the heart of the model. Together, the dyad works to engage families and provide intensive child welfare case management services, including weekly home visits by both the worker and the mentor. The family mentor transports parents to their first 4 treatment appointments. They introduce parents to recovery supports and help them build recovery capital, all through the lens of child safety and family well-being. Central to START's collaborative and family-centered approach is the use of shared decision-making, which is used in all that we do with families and within the team. Nothing about me without me is the mantra, and for the professional team, this reflects a value that any decision or action regarding the family should involve the family, so there are no secrets or surprises for the families we serve. And finally, program evaluation is an important component for supporting fidelity and outcomes for families. We use data to inform our decisions and the direction of the program, and all START teams engage in continuous quality improvement. So what are the goals of START, and what are we trying to achieve? First and foremost, to ensure child safety and well-being, since this is a child welfare-based model. START keeps children in the home whenever safe and possible to do so, thus decreasing overall out-of-home placements. We support, encourage, and lift parents up so they have the tools and support to enter and sustain into recovery, since we believe that really is one of the best ways to keep children safe. We help increase the knowledge, skill sets, and capacity of the parents to help them stabilize and strengthen their family situation, so repeat child maltreatment is reduced. And finally, we aim to create a new way of doing business by changing the system's ability to address co-occurring substance use, mental health, and child maltreatment. At the heart of START is a philosophy or spirit that represents how we approach individuals and families dealing with substance use disorders. In the START, we approach them with compassion, understanding, and hope for recovery. This philosophy is weaved through all that we do, from how we work as a team, supporting and holding each other accountable, to how we interact with our families. We believe in family, love, equity, and redemption. And you'll see the spirit of START in the way that we select our START staff, in the way we build START teams. It's reinforced during case reviews and in how we make decisions as a team, valuing everyone's perspectives. You hear it in our language, and how we talk about or to families, and in our non-punitive, strength-based approach. We see it as our job to role model this compassion and love in our communities and in our work with families. So let's talk outcomes. A lot of rigorous evaluation of START has occurred, and we have several studies published in peer-reviewed journals. Here's an overview of those findings and what we've learned so far. Mothers in START had higher rates of sobriety and early recovery than a matched comparison group, 66% in START versus 37%. Children in START entered out-of-home placement at half the rate of children from a matched comparison group, 21% versus 42%. And we've seen that outcome in several of our studies over and over again. At case closure, more than 75% of children in START remained with or were reunified with their parents. Next, we did a study to find out if the effects of START were sustained beyond the intervention after the child welfare case was closed. And the answer was yes. We learned that at 12 months post-intervention, more children in START remain free from both out-of-home placement and recurrence of child abuse and neglect, as compared to children served in treatment as usual child welfare services, 68.5% in START versus 56%. And there were also cost savings. For every dollar spent on START, jurisdictions potentially saved $2.22 just in the offset of costs associated with out-of-home placement. And finally, since START's a child welfare-based intervention, it is really important to us that we aren't contributing to the problem of racial disproportionality and disparity in the child welfare system. So we did a study to test the effects of START on Black families. After comparing outcomes for Black families in START and Black families receiving treatment as usual child welfare services, we found that at 12 months post-intervention, 80.6% of Black children served by START, but only 56% of Black children in treatment as usual remain free of both placement in state custody and child abuse and neglect. So for START-served families, parental use of opioids and mental health issues, rather than race, predicted child placement in state custody. And notably, once involved with START, there was no evidence of racial disparities in services or outcomes. So, as you can see, we've been building the evidence base for START for a long time, and we continue to study the model. When the START model is implemented with fidelity, these are the outcomes that a site can expect to see. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Kirk. So incorporating people with lived experience into the child welfare workforce can be accomplished at the systems level, as Tina explained with the START program. And it can also be done at the individual level, which is how it happened in my case. So I'm going to share some of my lived experiences, how I came to be involved with child welfare, and what it's been like for me working in a child welfare agency as someone with lived experience. I live in North Carolina, but I'm originally from Florida, and I am a peer support specialist, alcohol and drug counselor, and family peer specialist. I'm a family consultant with the Capacity Building Center for States, and I am a family partner on the North Carolina Department of Social Services Child Welfare Family Advisory Council. And I also serve on a couple of other state level committees, like their permanency design team. I have 3 children. I have 2 sons, 23 and 28, and I have a daughter who is 17. I am in long-term recovery. Substance use disorder runs deep on both sides of my family, and I have struggled with it my entire life. So this slide shows a timeline of how and when my substance use disorder started and progressed throughout my life. And it lists some of the treatments and the outcomes that resulted. And I think the primary contributing factor for me, or the catalyst, was being exposed to substances at a young age. My brother and I were both latchkey kids, so my parents didn't get home from work until late, and we had a lot of time unsupervised. So I first went into treatment at age 13, and again at 17. And then I did well for a long time. And I would say that for the most part, I was a functioning addict. I graduated high school, I worked, I was married, I took good care of my children. My kids were always the center of my life, my purpose. But then there were also times when life got really out of control for me. And I went through a tough time, particularly in my mid-30s, and kind of defaulted back to my original coping mechanisms, which was very unhealthy. And that led to a whole series of problems with severe consequences, including drug-related arrests and an overdose. And I pretty much tried every kind of treatment that was out there. All in all, I went to rehab a total of 7 times before it finally stuck. So I mentioned earlier that I have prior child welfare lived experience, which is actually something that I can draw on and use today in my work with families. But it happened on several occasions, and each time was a different circumstance and a different situation, but it was always a scary and stressful experience. But then in 2008, there was a domestic violence incident with my spouse. So a case was opened. Excuse me. My children were not removed from my care. And I was made to take victim classes, and then the case closed successfully. But the most impactful time for me was in 2014. I was living in Florida with my 2 youngest children, 7 and 15. and I had really kind of fallen back into addiction and ended up going to jail for 8 days. There was a temporary safety agreement, and my kids went to stay with their fathers. Being locked in that jail, I felt tremendously guilty about not being there with my kids. And I remember saying to myself, like, I cannot do this anymore. So when I was released, I went straight to an inpatient program in Fort Lauderdale for 30 days. And when I completed the program, I flew straight to North Carolina with 1 suitcase to my name and started fresh with my daughter. And my sons wanted to stay in Tennessee with their dad, and I was okay with that. So getting away from the toxic environment I was in really was the best thing that could have happened to me. The criminal charges were dropped, and I had to do a couple of things for Florida Child Protective Services, and then the case closed successfully. I started medicated assisted treatment. I was going to counseling every week, and I renewed my faith in God. And I even started up my own little online business and did well with that. We visited my sons a lot and everything was going great. And then 2 years later, life happened and I went through another tough time, but this time I stayed on track with my recovery. So how did I get started using my lived experience in a child welfare setting? I was looking for a job and I was at vocational rehab one day when I saw a flyer that said that Richmond County was holding a public meeting on the community's opioid crisis. And I had wanted to get involved in the community, and this seemed like the perfect way to start. So I went to the meeting intending to share, but I didn't feel comfortable speaking to a big group. So instead, I emailed the DSS director, Robbie Hall, and he invited me to join the Richmond County Drug Endangered Families Task Force. Around that same time, I heard about a HRSA grant-funded program called the Sandhills Opioid Response Consortium that was starting. And it would train, fund, and embed peer support specialists strategically over the 5 counties involved and promote harm reduction and community education. So I took the training and I got certified. And since I lived in Richmond County, it was perfect for me to be embedded in Richmond County Department of Social Services. And that is where I started the Richmond County DSS peer support program. So once I started doing peer support at Richmond County DSS, that was around 2019. That's when I started the program. I started getting referrals from caseworkers and working alongside caseworkers and with local providers to support, assist, and advocate for people with substance use disorder and parents and youth involved with child welfare. Soon after that, I started a weekly addiction recovery group there. And I also put on stigma trainings to the staff and the fire departments and people in the community. And we introduced Narcan to the caseworkers. And initially they were afraid to carry it, but that slowly changed over time. And it was used actually to save a parent's life in the parking lot. So by the next year, the program was really gaining momentum. And then in early 2022, I was promoted to peer supervisor over all of Richmond County. And then I sat for and passed the alcohol and drug counselor exam and then the family peer specialist exam. And then in November, I started doing consulting work for the Children's Bureau Capacity Building Center for States. So over the last 4 years of being a peer at Richmond DSS, I've been able to support hundreds of individuals, linking them to resources and helping to bridge the gap between families and child welfare, and also providing an example that people can and do recover. So how do Richmond County Social Services as an agency react to having someone with lived experience embedded in their office? Well, a few weeks after I was stationed here, Richmond County DSS invited me to be a part of their local family engagement committee, where I was excited to learn that child welfare agencies actually want to hear from the families they serve. Soon after that, they nominated me to be their representative on the state level Child Welfare Family Advisory Council, which is part of North Carolina's Family Leadership Model. Since then, I've gone on to serve on several other committees, like their Family First Prevention Work Group. And overall, Richmond County Department of Social Services has been very supportive of me pursuing professional certifications. They wrote me a letter of support when I applied for clemency to clear my record. They took me along with them to the CADCA convention in Washington, D.C. And although I was not technically a DSS employee, they always treated me like I was one of them. And from the very beginning, everyone there made me feel very welcome. They involved me in the planning of their new Child Advocacy Center. They covered the cost of trainings for me, like Triple P facilitator, child and family team meetings, forensic interviewing, and others, knowing that that would expand my knowledge and ability to serve families. So I'm excited to say that last month, Richmond County DSS offered me a position as a county employee, which is pretty amazing for someone like me with my past. And I think it sets an important precedent that it's okay to consider hiring people with lived experience and to see the value in the experiences that they bring. Having people with lived experience on staff can really help improve attitudes and reduce stigma among agencies and community partners towards families with substance use disorder and child welfare lived experience. Agency support of lived experience is crucial in the process. Seeing beyond the stigma can be tough, but it's worth it. And I think this is a great example of how we can not only talk about incorporating people with lived experience, but this is how it can literally be done in real life. So thank you.
We will now move into the panel portion of our presentation, where we will be joined by Danya Flanoy, Senior Program Associate with START, and Robbie Hall, Director of the Division of Social Services in Richmond County, North Carolina. Danya, my first question is for you. Can you discuss your experience and the impact of lived expertise in child welfare?
Sure, Heather. As I reflected on this question and preparing for this discussion today, I really had to, I kept going back to when I first started in child welfare 2 decades ago. What I knew about substance use disorder, what I thought I knew about everything about addiction, I really didn't know anything. My so-called knowledge of addiction really was shaped by my personal lived experiences that I experienced growing up in the inner city of Cleveland. Seeing firsthand the impact of addiction on families, more personally, my family, my community, what I saw and the experiences that I had with my childhood best friend, who mother was so deep in their addiction that she had to come stay with us for the summer. And so this is what shaped my early understanding of substance use disorder, addiction, and recovery, because I didn't even know what recovery was. This experience also it was very personal for me in terms of, I experienced fathers, more specifically my own, cycling in and out of the criminal justice system instead of really being offered help for treatment for their addiction. So again, my personal experiences, my childhood experiences really shaped that view. I felt like addiction was a criminal offense and you should be criminally charged if you were, instead of receiving the help that you needed. And so it really wasn't until I began working in START as a child welfare worker, paired with my partner who was in long-term recovery, that these negative views, and I call them negative because that's what they are, negative views of parents with substance use disorder changed. That's when that light bulb went off. But this light bulb didn't go off overnight. This change evolved, my thinking evolved over time. What I learned from working with START family mentors was parents do love their children and they wish to be the best parents they can be. I also learned that substance use is not a choice. My father didn't choose to be, addicted to substances and neglect and abandon his children. My friend's mother didn't choose to leave her daughter to fend for herself and her siblings. That wasn't a choice. And so I also learned that everyone's recovery pathway to recovery looks differently. So this traditional, you got to go to 12-step meetings, you got to go to AA, you got to go to NA. Everybody's pathway looks differently. And so, Heather, what I also found working with individuals with lived experience, expertise, rather, and those who are in long-term recovery, this really helps shape the office culture of the child welfare agency that I work for. And it shaped everyone's view of what recovery looks like. Our STAR family mentors had the innate ability to engage families by being able to identify with families' shared feelings, shared experiences. It all boils down to relatability. Because in this world, as we are humans, and let's face it, we all want someone we can connect with. We all want someone to connect with that have those shared experiences that we have, or can identify with those shared feelings that we go through in life. That's what lived expertise is all about. It's about that connection. Someone who has been there and done that. Also, the knowledge and understanding I gain about addiction and recovery will later transfer in the way I led and supervised my START dyads. As you heard Tina talk about, provide that overview of START. Because family mentors help bridge the gap between child welfare and families, in START, we are intentional about hiring a diverse workforce that is reflective of our community and model what recovery looks like, not just for staff, but most importantly for the families we serve. The knowledge and experience I gained working in START is invaluable, and it really helped me to work better with my families. So before I close, Heather, I really want to take a moment to speak to frontline child welfare staff, whether you're just starting out or whether you've been in the field for 20 plus years. You really, before you get back to your daily grind, I want you to take a moment to really think about how your thoughts shape your beliefs working with families with substance use disorder, and how your beliefs impact your emotions and feelings, and how your emotions and feelings affect how you respond to families. If you find your response to be uncomfortable, you are not alone. So allow yourself some grace. Knowing is half the battle. What's important is what you do moving forward. Do you continue business as usual and act like you don't know this information and not make any changes? Or do you actively work to change your practice? Change is uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable, and it's okay. But be willing to step outside your comfort zone. As one provider said, and I love this, I have this posted in my office, that the awesome zone is just outside the comfort zone. So be sure enough in yourself and willing to be awesome in the work that you do with your families. Thank you, Heather, for letting me share.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience in those strategies, Danya. Now, Kelly, can you share with us how incorporating people with lived expertise benefits caseworkers and the Child Welfare Agency?
Sure. I think that people with lived experience can benefit the child welfare workforce in a lot of ways. People with lived experience typically have a positive approach to dealing with families and parents because of their own past experiences. And it's really important how social workers and people with lived experience approach parents and families. We all know that caseworkers have a lot on their plate, and it can be really easy to become discouraged and negative. But maintaining a strengths-based approach with understanding, empathy, and a non-judgmental tone can improve staff's well-being and improves families' chances for success. And I think it makes a difference when I'm focusing on a parent's strengths while I'm talking to their caseworker. And we can work together with caseworkers to help parents and youth get into treatment. Families involved with child welfare who are affected by substance use disorders have complex needs, and it contributes to lower reunification rates and longer stays in out-of-home care for children. And a large percentage of cases are related to substance use disorder or mental health. So having someone in the agency that is successful in recovery sets a great example. And I always tell my clients, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. I've gone to clients' homes with caseworkers. I remember one time a caseworker asked me to ride with her to a client's house because she knew that he had relapsed. So we were able to go talk to him together, and he agreed to go to treatment. And we knew that it needed to happen right then and there. So he rode back with us, and I was able to be on the phone in the car making arrangements to secure a bed for him at detox. So it's great to work together with child welfare staff. Helping getting clients into treatment. I know I've helped many clients with the process of gathering up all the required documentation needed to get into a program where they can, and we have one here in Richmond County or in North Carolina where they can take their child with them to treatment. I can drive them to treatment if I need to. If a family member comes out of treatment and relapses, I can tell them, hey, you know what? I did the same thing. It's normal. Would you like to try Medicaid assisted treatment? We could get you an appointment with a local provider. So people with lived experiences can help clients develop a personalized recovery plan and really take time getting to know the clients and helping them figure out what is the best treatment option for them based on their own unique needs. So we can also help link families to resources, which can lighten the caseworker's load. And that's, one less thing that they have to do. So we can call and make appointments with the client right there, sort of a warm handoff, which improves the probability that they will keep that appointment. And we can stay engaged with them throughout the case process. I might get a call from a parent saying, you know what, I don't like this provider. I'm not going back to them. And I can say, there's another provider in town that we can call. I think you might like this one. If they need housing, I can give them a housing list, or I can take them to put in applications for housing. I had a client who was turned down for income-based housing, and I was able to go with her to her appeal hearing. She was still denied, but we were able to find a landlord who was willing to meet with her, and he ended up renting her and her two sons a place. So there's lots of ways that we can help and really get in there. We can help them with employment, basic life skills, get them signed up for services that they may not even know about. We can serve as a neutral party that can help build trust and communication between families and caseworkers. Improving accountability. Parents often rely on communication from their caseworkers, and it's frustrating for them when they don't hear back. So peers can talk to caseworkers to see what's happening and share that back with the parents. I've had clients who call me and say, I've been calling and texting my caseworker for 3 days, and I know they see my messages and they're not calling me back, and I need to talk to them. A lot of times I can pick up the phone here in the office and call that caseworker and get that family the information that they're looking for quickly. So this helps bridge the communication gap, and it helps families feel like they're getting more help, and it feels like that they have someone on their side. People with lived experience can help families understand the process and kind of explain what comes next, or what they can expect, or why things are happening the way they are. And that knowledge helps reduce the power differential and helps them feel more comfortable about what they're going through. We can help families prepare for their case planning meetings or their child and family team meetings, explaining the importance of these meetings, because to them, it may just sound like another meeting they have to go to, but we can explain and encourage them to bring support, help them understand the overall importance and goal of the meeting, I always suggest that families make a list of all their questions so they can get those answers before they leave the meeting. And help parents understand that DSS is not looking to keep their children. They want to help the parents get better for their children, and also kind of help understand the gravity of the situation. People with lived experience in child welfare can check in with families. We can drive families to services. We can pick them up for their family time visits. We can also provide updates to workers. A lot of times the parents may be texting with me, but they may not want to answer the caseworker calls. So the caseworker will call me and say, have you talked to so-and-so? And I can say, yes, I talked to her earlier. She's doing her parenting classes. So this also helps the caseworker and decreases their workload. And we can also serve as another set of eyes and ears, regularly checking in with families, calling, texting to remind and encourage them to stay focused on goals. We can also support older youth in foster care if they're having issues with substance use disorder or mental health. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, people with lived experiences within a child welfare agency can reduce negative attitudes and stigma. People with lived experience can serve as a positive example within the agency. And like, I am not shy about being in recovery. And I think seeing that helps staff to remember that people do recover, and it gives them insight and hope for the families that they work with. I think there's a trust that forms when a client knows that you've been where they are. So you can really use that to your advantage and get to know the person and their story and build on that common bond relationship, and use that to encourage them to stay on track with what's important and with their recovery and with their case plan goals. Parents can get stuck on how unfair they think it is that they have a case, or on the anger or hurt that they feel towards the person who called on them, instead of kind of focusing on what they can do now to resolve the issue. So that's something that people with lived experiences can work with families to get past, kind of coming to terms with those issues and redirect them into thinking about what do they need to do now to get their children back.
Thanks so much for sharing those strategies and benefits, Kelly. Robbie, will you tell us the steps you took and the barriers you overcame to bring folks with lived expertise on board in Richmond County, North Carolina?
Sure. Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Kelly, for doing part of the job for me. How you explain the value and what can be brought into the child welfare system is exactly what we hoped and what we have seen over that time. I've been in this business for 30 years, mental health, substance use disorder, child welfare. We've talked about people with lived experience, peer support, you know, from the early 90s to finally conversations in child welfare in 2000. Those conversations were just that. We saw the interventions, we saw the inclusion at integral levels, but not really implemented to or for our system. So not too long ago, in the last 5 or so years, we had some opportunities. That opportunity came from grants and work with our university partners, such as North Carolina State University and others, to look at how could we embed and how could we work with people with lived experience directly in our child welfare. And so we said, at least some of the leadership here said, that this is what we need to do. We've always wanted that to happen, but we've never seen the reality of it. We've seen pilots and grants that never went anywhere. So we took that chance. We reached out. Kelly is the one that showed us that it could work and has done most of the work for us. I can talk about the things that I'm going to talk about that help, but having a person that was as dedicated and moved the needle made the difference. And then support behind that. So some of the issues that you're going to start with right off, even if you have the desire to implement, are the stigma. You know, that stigma reaches across policy and procedure and staff. So for example, the background check. We have very strict policies on who can work in child welfare. And when we check the backgrounds and we look at those issues, we have to make a determination, not just for our agency, but liability insurance, there's a whole host of those things. So we had to find a way to show that this will work. And so that takes work, talking with your HR department, with your insurers, how we do it, showing the different credentials that this individual has done over this time. So that was one of the ways that we supported this program, by helping our person with lived experience gain those credentials so that we could show to everyone involved the dedication and the benefit that would come from that. And that's how we overcome that challenge. And we move forward. Staff stereotypes. The staff doubt a lot of things. When they work in this field, successes are few and far between very often, mainly because our system doesn't have the resources to provide to our families. But they're going to ask you, why did you invest in this person when I could have had another caseworker to reduce my caseload size? And we have to go back to exactly what we heard. This person with lived experience can make those connections that we have been unable to, can help in this process, and to help us achieve the mission that we are working for, reunification of our families, providing more safety and better outcomes within our system for our children. And so that's a constant mission and what you have to bring to the front of this work. We talk about education. Kelly provided that education, and this agency had to provide education to our staff to understand what do we mean by people with lived experience and how they fit within our system. We had to have trainings done. We had to bring in discussions, and we had to find intervention points where this role made sense. And we had to make sure that it was included, not looked over, not changed, but how we actually had real inclusion at all levels. So, final part of that is, again, that same question. When the staff ask you, why did you invest in this person versus another staff, you have to convince the agency the same way. I have to come back and show the value that this added to our work. I had to find money, be it grant or cutting some other areas to make this work. But when I say I had to, it's not really I had to, I needed to. We needed to improve the outcomes in our county. We needed to have this make a difference. And I think that's what we've shown over the years. This isn't one of the grants I've been in, many that have started and stopped as soon as the dollar stopped. We found a way to make it work. And that success is just like Kelly said, we found a permanent inclusion point and funding to make that move forward. So we understand the value, we've shown the value, and we've presented that to our community. We do it at every level, the Drug Endangered Family Task Force, education events, with our stakeholders and partners. Kelly and her work is highlighted so that we can show that our community knows. There was some fear in the beginning. We had social workers afraid of Narcan when they came into this building. And why are we giving that to families that we're working with? And what does that mean? But we overcame that, right? The instruction, the work together, and the inclusion made a difference. Now they know where to go, and people in our community know who to reach out to. And we're providing a lot of services that we would never have even thought before, because we were dependent on just what was in our toolbox, not really what was out there and how those connections could be made. So I hope that helps as you move forward in this work, because I don't know any other way to do it than to just do it and have faith. Because if you have faith in people and the families that you work with, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be rewarded for that. And a failure is only an opportunity to learn. Just don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie, for providing those barriers, strategies, and successes. What an opportunity for us all to learn from. Tina, I'm wondering, can you share with us what incorporating folks with lived expertise looks like at a broader system level?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Heather. I mentioned earlier that START's a model often used to transform systems of care within and between child welfare and substance use treatment. And the model uses a variety of strategies to do that. But at the heart of the START model are the family mentors and their lived expertise. In START, we've always known that the voices of those who've experienced the child welfare system and who are in long-term recovery really have a critical role in helping families find recovery and stability. But the integration of lived expertise in child welfare can really also be used as a catalyst for systems change. And you kind of heard Robbie just speak to that. And we've seen that happen in START. I can tell you that in addition to the outcomes I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, when jurisdictions implement START and specifically hire family mentors, we see those practice changes early and ongoing. And again, similar to what Robbie was saying. But what we found was, first of all, a reduction in stigma about substance use and parenting. And that includes the use of less stigmatizing language, less punitive practices. We see improved access and retention of parents in treatment services, less children coming into care. And really that support for families to remain intact increases among your staff, among treatment providers, the courts, community partners. Collaborative relationships are strengthened, and there's more reliance on community supports. And the cool thing is that these practices begin to spread to other parts of the organization. So as staff get to know the value of the peer and how helpful they can be, they call on them for many things. Peers can help with training, both formal and informal, and they really do become a go-to for staff in the organization who might need help with engaging a family, or they might have a question about recovery support groups or treatment. And I think that Kelly said it, but just seeing recovery each day in and of itself can be a game changer for those who may not have ever believed recovery was possible, or maybe they didn't see it in their daily work. We did a study and we found that START workers had more empathy after working in START because of their relationships with family mentors. So that was really important for us to understand. And so slowly, as Robbie said, the child welfare office culture begins to change, as does the community perception of the work they're doing. And before you know it, slowly you begin to see small system changes. And really, anytime you incorporate lived expertise in the form of peer support in child welfare, it's going to help families. And inevitably, it's going to change the office culture, just as we've heard our panel say today. But getting there, that's the important piece. It takes thoughtful planning, time, commitment, readiness, and maybe most importantly, good leadership. And so I'm kind of going to reiterate what Robbie said, but for those considering implementing START or integrating peers into your workforce, there are several considerations. First and foremost, readiness and preparation. What's the need? What's your vision for meeting that need? You got to consider the funding and resources that you're going to need, and then how to sustain it. So Robbie just said it perfectly, and that's exactly what I had wanted to share with you all. What about organizational capacity for implementation? Are your staff ready? What are they going to need to get there? And then you have to think about things like onboarding, supervision, training needs, support. So a lot of considerations, but I kind of want to circle back to the most important piece, and that's leadership. Without strong leadership, it's really challenging to implement a new EBP like START or to integrate lived expertise into your workforce. So leadership buy-in is critical. And importantly, and again, thank you, Robbie, for your leadership, because the question is, does leadership see the value of lived expertise and how it can improve outcomes for families? Can they envision the benefits to their organization? And if so, are they open to changing practice, trying something different, innovative, and then making the space for that work to happen? Good leaders are always going to acknowledge that there's a great need to change our current system and kind of own the fact that many families have been failed by the child welfare system, particularly families of color. So these interventions are really important to improve our practices. And finally, good leadership is critical because there are really some large systemic challenges to implementing an EBP, particularly with the integration of lived expertise. Things like clearing the way for the hiring of individuals who might have a past child welfare case or a criminal conviction. Providing a good living wage with benefits like all other team members. And then creating equitable access to the peer services or EBPs like START so that all eligible families have the ability to benefit from these services and supports. And finally, how do you sustain it, expand it, and make it available across the board to everyone? And I just want to close by saying that I have just been so honored in my life to have had the opportunity to learn from so many amazing family mentors through the years. These experiences and relationships have absolutely shaped the way I've done my work, the way I roll out START across the nation, and it still impacts me every day. Bottom line, I'm a better person for it. So I encourage you to move forward with the integration of peers and lived expertise into your organization and workforce. It is so worth it. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Tina. I wanted to take a moment and thank the members of our session today for sharing their experiences and expertise with us. And I also want to thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.